and I thought this is cool because Gang of Four for me was about being thrilling, alive, and dangerous.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Live Through That, the podcast where influential artists of the 80s and 90s talk to us about a pivotal moment in their lives. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and we're continuing a month of stories from artists that are going to be performing at the Cruel World Festival in Pasadena on May 20th. This week, we're thrilled to have Jon King on the podcast, the singer and songwriter of the band Gang of Four. Gang of Four were one of the most influential of the post-punk bands. Their music has been cited by artists like R.E.M., the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Nirvana as major influences. More recently, you can hear echoes of their sound in bands like Franz Ferdinand, Bloc Party, and so many others. Today, he shares with us a tale of how a stroke of luck and smarts changed the course of his life.
I think the pivotal moment in my life when I thought about doing something along these lines or getting involved in creative work was when I was 11. I had my background was I came from a fairly hard up working class family. My dad was an electrician who left school at 13, and we didn't have really a book in the house, and we didn't have a record player, and I got the equivalent of a scholarship to a posh English public school, i.e. a private school. But there was a scheme for fees to be paid by the local authority. The local council paid my fees to the school. And I went there, which was, quite a culture change because everyone was pretty well-heeled and I wasn't. But I went for the first time to a really well-equipped art department. And I went actually up to that school with Kevin Lysett, who became the guitarist of the Mekons. He and I were at primary school together. And when I went there in the art department, they had a record player that was on the whole time, which is the first time I'd heard people playing music on a record player. And the music that they played was not like the music that you heard on the then very conservative, middle of the road radio stations in Britain, which were very oriented towards older people. There wasn't really a pop or rock music at all on the radio then, and so I was suddenly hearing this strange stuff, and the strangest of the strange stuff that I heard was Bob Dylan, who I'd never heard a peep of. I hadn't even heard his name, and they were playing Highway 61 Revisited over and over again, not just that individual track, the album Highway 61 Revisited, and it was like being sort of imaginatively hit in the face by something. I was just as if I was hypnotized by it. I couldn't believe that this type of music existed or this type of art existed, and it was incredibly thrilling. And you knew by listening to him singing, or I felt I knew that he was against all the squares and the straights and the fascists and all these other things that I sort of hadn't really thought much about, but knew I didn't like, and that there was something else there, something that was rich and powerful and thrilling and good, and that I really think that sort of turned me towards wanting to do that sort of thing. Not exactly sure. I wasn't exactly sure then what that sort of thing was, but I knew what it certainly was not, and it was incredible to me. that had happened.
King attended the Sevenoaks School, one of the oldest schools in Britain dating back to the 1400s. It must have been an exceptional time period for the kids in the art and music classes at his school, as his class included former Gang of Four member Andy Gill, as well as future members of the Mekons, as well as filmmaker Paul Greengrass.
Yeah, it was half boarding school and half a day bod. I went to school 6 days a week, and we wore, school uniforms. I don't know how my father afforded it, because we were not at all well off. We didn't have any heating in our house and things like that. We didn't have any hot water, and it was yes, it was half board. It was a bit like Harry Potter, really, and it was incredibly fiercely competitive and academic. But in the art department, I was there with Kevin Lycett, and by the time I was 15, the art department people were me. Kevin Lycett was the guitarist of the Mekons. In the year below me was Andy Gill, obviously my partner, songwriting partner in Gang of Four. Tom Greenhalgh, guitarist of the Mekons. Mark White, Paul Greengrass, the director of the Bourne Conspiracy films, was in my class, and Adam Curtis, the documentary filmmaker. So it was quite a group of people, all sort of sharing their thoughts and ideas and their competitiveness with each other. It was quite surprising, really. It was more surprising after the event than at the time. I mean, I think we were there, and I think we just all shared a sort of desire to sort of do something that mattered. I mean, I don't know. I think probably all teenagers want to do that, but it was lucky enough to be with a bunch of other people who I think sort of steered us all on in some way. And it was a very liberal class, run actually by Mark White of the Mekons' father, who was an inspirational man who encouraged us all to think analytically and critically about the received ideology and received ideas, both about art and about society and politics and things. It was pretty. I was very lucky. My two brothers went to a really lousy, terrible school by contrast, because they weren't academic like me. I was very, very lucky.
So how did one get into such a school?
Because at the age of 11, there was a thing. I think it's quite discredited now, but there was a thing called the 11 plus, which was basically an IQ test. So I just vaguely remember all the kids in my primary school, which is the age from 5 to 11, going into a great big hall and sitting down and being presented with this paper for which we hadn't been prepared at all. And it was things like, you'd have a circle and a triangle and a square, and then they'd ask you what the next symbol was, that kind of thing. And and there were, as a result of this test, a certain number of boys were given a free place at this school, which was relatively close to where I lived. So I got the bus in and out every day. But it was like, so quite apart from the, obviously Bob Dylan and Highway 61 revisited at that school, it was going to a place like that, which was sort of so amazing for someone of my background. I mean, like I say, my father, I don't think had ever read a book. I mean, I don't think I ever saw him. I was never sure whether he could actually read, but I think he could.
Coming from such a working class background, how did his parents feel about him going into the arts?
I think my father, certainly, he said to me, the one thing he didn't want me to do was to work with my hands. It was a hard life for him. I mean, he died at the age of 48 of colon cancer, which I think used to be thought of as a working class a disease, but based on diet because we ate such bad food. But when I came to my making decisions about further education, which is going to university, like 17, 18, he was quite negative about it to start with because he didn't see the point of it. Um, I think he would have, at the time, would have preferred I did something that had more of an applied um, function to it. I went to study fine art, for example, and I think he would have probably preferred if I'd done it at all to have done something like graphic design, or industrial design or something like that. But that said, I think he just wanted me to not have the life that he'd had, which was a pretty hard one.
Gang of Four broke up in 1983, but reformed in the early 90s to release 2 more albums, Mall in 1991 and Shrink Wrapped in 95. 2011 brought another classic album into their catalog, The Well-Received Content. After a tour supporting that record, guitarists Andy Gill and Jon had a disagreement about the band's direction.
Well, I didn't leave the band in 2011, 2012. What actually happened was that Andy and I fell out about what we did or didn't want to do. And we had, I kept very quiet about all of this, but he widely said interview after interview that I had left the band and that we'd had a discussion about it, and he decided to carry on, which is not the case at all. We had a rather ugly falling out about the fact that he had set up a company in the band name, which I didn't know about, and he controlled the bank account and locked me out of the bank account and kept all the money. So I said I wanted the band to stop altogether. I didn't want. Because we were a 50-50 setup, blocking corporation. I absolutely did not leave the band. What I absolutely said was I don't want the band to carry on. And he said, well, I'm going to carry on with. Well, I didn't have a conversation with him. Our only contact was through lawyers. So I never had a conversation with him about whether I was or wasn't in the band. I was actually the problem was as you probably know, he was an alcoholic, and I didn't like working with someone who was so drunk so much of the time, and it was very difficult for me. And I didn't like that, and so I wanted it to stop, and he, as I say, we didn't have a conversation about it. He after we had an exchange of a lot of legal letters, in the end it came down to the fact that because we were a 50-50 thing, he had as much right to use the name as I did, and he did, and he had this pickup band for some years, and in fact he even put out 3 albums under the name, which I couldn't stop, although I did do as much as I could to object to this. But so no, that in terms of pivotal moments, that wasn't a pivotal moment. That was just it was very depressing, and it was unhappy. But on the other hand, I did not want to work with him anymore because he was so messed up by the drink.
In 2021, they released a box set of their music, 77 to 81. How was it revisiting those classic works?
It was fantastic, really. First of all, of course, I had to listen to what we'd done, and like I think most creative people, I don't really like listening to my own work at all. I hate it if I go around someone's house or out and they're playing my music. I don't really like listening to it very much, but I did like listening to it as a result of the of this box set, because I had to have it remastered. It was remastered at Abbey Road Studios, where we'd recorded Solid Gold, and it was we got the original quarter-inch mixes from the original sessions. The actual 24-inch 2-inch tapes of the 24-track things had been destroyed. There was a big fire at the storage facility, but we had the 1/4 inches. So it was remastered from the 1/4 inch onto beautiful 180-gram virgin vinyl. And again, I don't know if you've heard it, but it sounds absolutely fabulous. And the other thing was, obviously, as you know, I wrote all the lyrics, or 90% of the lyrics. And I thought it would be a good thing to have, for the first time in the book that came with it, the words that I had composed. And so, being a bit lazy, or being extremely lazy, I thought I could just go onto the interwebnet thing and go to many of these sites which have got lyrics.com or whatever, and just cut and paste the lyrics into the book. But found that the lyrics that are posted online are I don't know whether they've been done by AI or machine learning or someone who's not interested, but they weren't at all the lyrics, not at all, but they were very unlike the lyrics I'd written. And I used to spend a lot of, I spent an incredible amount of time honing the words to those songs. And I then listened to the songs on the records to remind me of the what I'd written. And I even found my original notebooks where I'd written, like, "At Home is a Tourist" and "Natural's Not in It," and songs like that. And I found my original longhand notes for those songs, which I put in the book. And then we thought it'd be nice to have. I thought it'd be nice to have a knowledge nugget next to each one. Like, for example, there's a song called "In the Ditch" on Solid Gold, which was inspired by the book that was sent to every single household in Britain in 1980, I think it was, something like that. There was a book thing called "Protect and Survive," and we were then under extreme threat of nuclear war, and it was very, very dangerous and stressful time. It's quite reminiscent of what we're at now, but much more extreme. There was definitely a sense that there was going to be a war, so much so that every household in Britain was sent a book, which each city and town had to come up with a plan to say what would happen if a bomb dropped in the middle of their place. So we had London and the bomb, Leeds and the bomb, Sheffield and the bomb. So Leeds and the bomb, where I lived at the time, would say the epicenter of the bomb would destroy 3 miles from the center. Everything would melt. Then there'd be the radiation zone, where everyone would die of radiation sickness. And then there'd be the bit outside, which was basically everyone would then starve to death. And it had all these tips of what to do when the bomb dropped. Like, when we were told that the Soviets were launching their missiles, we were supposed to get under a table, whitewash the windows, get under a table, and fill, if we had time, black bin liner bags with clothes to sort of absorb some of the radiation, which is actually really funny. And so "In the Ditch," a lot of the lyrics from that come from that booklet. Or if you were outside, it's called "In the Ditch." You're supposed to dive into a ditch. If you saw a mushroom cloud, you should dive down and lie down in a ditch, and which is quite hilarious in a dark way. There was that sort of thing. So there's a knowledge nugget that was involved there, and then there was a little anecdote, and we thought it would be nice to get anecdotes from people who were around at the time or who we were friends with. So Hugo, who knows everybody in the US, and he lives in Massachusetts, so he got in touch with people like Michael Stipe, and whatever. Pylon and Peter Hook and all that kind of stuff, and Lowell from The Cure and whatever. And he got and said, do you want to sort of give us 100 words about stuff? And it was amazing. Fleetwood wrote a bit for us, and we had some amazing contributions. about from people who had played with us at the time. I mean, um, it's and that was really interesting. So every page had lyrics, sort of something about what it was like at the time. Um, like when I wrote what's that song ends ether, caught up with the ether. At the very end, there's a line that goes, "There may be oil under rock all," which is Americans particularly find that mystifying. But my little knowledge nugget there was that the United Kingdom had landed a Royal Marine Commando onto this rock in the middle of the Atlantic, which is about the size of a small apartment building, covered in guano, and claimed it as British territory. It was the last act of British imperialism in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s, declared it to be British territory. And I thought this was hilariously funny. And the guy had to sit on this guano-stained rock for, I can't remember, like 60 days, and then claimed it as British. And the Irish and the Icelandic government and I think Denmark then, and even now, object to this annexation of this rock, because of course there is likely to be oil surrounding it. So it was a kind of, so those things interested me, putting it back together again, because it made me look at why I'd written those words and what it was all about. And some of them were quite Nostradamus-like, really. The songs. I mean, like that song "Guns Before Butter." I mean, it's like Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So I found it very thrilling.
In support of the box set, Gang of Four enlisted guitarist David Pajo and embarked on a U.S. tour that reinvigorated the band.
Well, David Pajo meeting David Pajo and working with David Pajo is an incredible revelation last year. I mean, obviously, I was notwithstanding, the fact that it had been really difficult working with Andy or impossible to work with him. He and I had been friends from the age of 14 or 15 and worked together for many years. I mean, obviously we had some difficult times and had completely fallen out by the end. We hadn't spoken to each other for I don't know, the 8 years before he died. So I was. The main thing was I loved his guitar playing. Obviously, like everybody else, what a fantastic, brilliant, one-off talent there. And I was thinking, well, we can't play without being able to do something that sort of honors all of that, and yet also is not like, as you just said, karaoke. You don't want to do karaoke. You want to do something that's got threat to it, that's got intention to it, that's got authenticity to it. And David's name came up, and I thought, wow, man. I mean, because I was a big fan of his work already. I liked what he'd done. And I was pretty amazed. And when we had our first sort of tryout with him, he had really, really nailed both getting at Andy's particular sound, but then having Pajoism, with it. And the music sort of just became thrilling and alive and dangerous. And I thought, this is cool, because Gang of Four, for me, was about being thrilling, alive, and dangerous. I still love it, when you own the stage and you come forward as a band, people sometimes will back away from us. And so David was sensational. And having done that tour last year of the US, which was really very successful, we then so what David and I are now starting to do, and we're going to start quite soon, is writing together, and we'll see how it works out.
Thank you, Jon, for taking the time to share your story. Gang of Four will be continuing to tour in Europe this year, and fingers crossed, we'll hear some new music as well. I also want to thank the band Jupe Jupe for creating our brand new theme song. You can find out more about their music at jupejupemusic.com. And if you have a story about one of the bands performing at Cruel World, maybe they were one of your first concerts or their song was your prom theme song, anything, send us a voice memo at mhipple@gmail.com. I'd love to do a bonus episode featuring some of these stories. And a friendly reminder that you can also buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel on 90s artists, Live Through That, wherever you buy your books. If you like this show, please subscribe so you'll know when the latest episode comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Mike Hipple Photo, all one word. Thanks for listening. We'll have some more stories next week.